to record my lecture today because I have a little bit of a sore throat and I thought it might be beneficial to record my lecture in case I lose my voice. So today our notes are 2.3, so they're the third section of notes, new foreign policy. So we just talked about the Spanish-American War, and now we're going to look at what happens after the Spanish-American War. What policies aren't being made? So first, we got a reading focus question. So why did the United States want to build the Panama Canal? What were the goals of Theodore Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy? In what ways did the foreign policies of Taft and Wilson differ from those of Roosevelt? Those are our three main questions here. So when you're looking back at your CCC, these are the questions that you should be able to answer. So we have this idea of speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but just keep that phrase in the back of your mind that Teddy Roosevelt is carrying a big stick. Our overall concept here, after the American-Spanish War, Spanish-American War, America was a world power. They had lots of power economically, militarily, politically. They dominated the global stage. And they also had those territories. We learned in our last section of notes that the United States got Guam, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico as unincorporated territories, as well as not really, but like sort of Cuba. But with the Platt Amendment, Teller Amendment, it's kind of confusing. But the U.S. is not supposed to have control of Cuba, but they are a world power. So America is also expanding its power to more countries. So not only the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, but we also have America expanding its power into other countries. We looked at China as well and Hawaii. President Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, Woodrow Wilson, who we learned about last unit, we'll also talk about those three presidents again, take different foreign policy approaches as the U.S. grows into a world power. So each of them has a different approach, and we are going to look at each of those approaches in this section. So first off, we have, this is over here, this is McKinley. You can't tell what's happening. He's getting shot because that's what happens to presidents. Apparently, they just get shot a lot. So by 1900s, the U.S. had emerged as a genuine world power, just like I said in the last slide, controlling several overseas territories. Same idea as last slide. This led to the decisive victory for William McKinley in the 1900 election. What that means is that because he won the Spanish-American War and he won these territories, people really liked McKinley. So they voted for him again in the 1900 election. However, as we know, McKinley gets shot. And unlike Theodore Roosevelt, McKinley dies. So McKinley gets shot and he dies. And VP, our wonderful Teddy Roosevelt, takes over for McKinley. So McKinley is out, he is dead, and Theodore Roosevelt is now president. If you remember from your president's quiz, second term in, Teddy takes over. All right, so we have our three people right here, two mustachioed and one not mustachioed. So we have Teddy, Taft, and Wilson. They all have different ways of diplomacy. Diplomacy is just a fancy word for how you get along with other countries. So how do you relate to other countries? So Teddy's is called big stick diplomacy, if you remember. And then with Taft, you have dollar diplomacy. And with Woodrow, you have moral diplomacy. So these three different types, we're going to break those down here. So our first up, we just looked at how McKinley died and Teddy becomes president. So we're going to first look at Teddy. And the first thing Teddy wants to do is he wants to get the Panama Canal. So fighting for the Spanish-American War showed Americans the need for a shorter route between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. That is the big idea here. They were going all the way around South America, and that was taking way too long. They needed a faster route to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific by water. So the Isthmus of Panama, or the closest part of Panama, the smallest part of Panama, was an ideal location for a canal to be built. So the Isthmus of Panama is the area that they want to build the Panama Canal. But at this time, sketchily, we're going to learn how weird this is. So Panama is controlled by Colombia, and Colombia does not want to sell their land. So the U.S. tried to work with the treaty with Colombia, but Colombia was like, no, we don't really want to do that. So knowing Teddy, he does whatever he wants because he's Teddy Roosevelt, and this made him really mad. So he does something kind of sketchy, and he suggests that he suggests the Panamanians, the people of Panama should revolt against Colombia. So he wants Panama. Panama is his goal, but Colombia is in the way. So this is kind of a weirdly phrased sentence. I'm not really in love with it. So the idea is that if Panama has a revolt against Colombia, the U.S. will be able to get the Panama Isthmus and be able to make the canal. So that's kind of a complicated storyline there. But that is what's going to happen. So a revolt took place November 1903 with American warships waiting offshore to provide support for the rebels. So the United States government is supporting the Panamanian rebellion against Cuba by, once again, we see boats being super key important. The United States recognized Panama as an independent nation and in return received a strip of land for the canal. So they did end up getting the Isthmus for the canal to be built. The United States ends up paying $10 million to the Panama people for the canal zone. So $10 million. Again, that is not that much for this land, not super expensive. So they're kind of getting a deal. The difficult construction of the canal made it take about 10 years to complete. So if you're thinking about this, there's a picture here. You have to get all this transportation. You have to build all these railroads, and then you have to send goods over there. You have to take all the dirt away. So it just takes a really long time. They had lots of issues making it. So it took 10 years to finally make. So like I was saying, it takes a really long time to get around the entire continent of South America. So by having the Panama Canal, you are cutting down to 1/3 the size. So you have 12,000 miles here, going all the way around South America. When you have the Panama Canal, it only has about 4,000 miles. So it cuts the time down 66% or so. So this facilitated movement and trade between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. So that just means they had a lot more ability to trade between these without having to use the railroads. They can use others. They can use the boats. They can also go maybe over this way to China, or goods can go from over here to Europe. And this allowed the Navy to quickly get to the ocean in times of war. Again, we are seeing how important the Navy is to America at this time, how important boats are. So if you have something going on in San Francisco and your boats are in New York or Florida, you can now get to that place a lot quicker than you would if you had to go all the way around South America. So this is Teddy here. You can see that he's digging up the Panama Canal. So lots of people disapproved of the way that Roosevelt handled the Panama Canal crisis, the Panama Canal issue, because he really kind of overstepped his bounds there. He started a revolt in another country so that he could get something he wanted, which lots of Americans were like, okay, that was kind of unnecessary. People died for this, and they didn't really like that. But others were convinced the canal was essential or vital, very important to national security and prosperity. So they thought it was super important that the Navy would be able to get from one place to the other, and that the economy would do well. It would be prosperous. They'd have prosperity if the canal was built. So some disapproved of Theodore Roosevelt's involvement in the Panama Revolt, and others thought it was necessary for national security and the economy. By 1921, in recognition of the illegal means used to acquire the canal zone, starting a revolt in another country, Congress actually paid Colombia $25 million in reparations and damages to Colombia for their involvement in the Panamanian Revolution. So again, look right here. We got a big stick. We're seeing a big stick again, and that's Teddy Roosevelt, and he's the one that carries that big stick because he has big stick diplomacy. Again, speak softly, carry a big stick. So, speak softly, right here, is peacefully negotiating. So, we'll negotiate with you, we'll make it work, but the big stick is the U.S. Navy. So when you combine these two things together, Roosevelt's saying, all right, we're going to make a deal with you. We want to be peaceful, but if you don't agree to what we want, if you don't agree to our terms, we have this U.S. Navy here that is very strong and we're going to kill you. So, although they have this peaceful negotiation here, the big stick is the U.S. Navy, and if you don't agree to what the U.S. wants, they are going to use their Navy. So if you think about the Spanish-American War, they kind of carry this policy over, because after the Spanish-American War, you have that Platt Amendment that pretty much says, we're going to have you get some freedom, but we're not actually going to give you any freedom. So that's the kind of what we're seeing here. So peacefully negotiating, quote unquote, peacefully negotiating, but you are intimidated by the U.S. Navy. And Roosevelt used the threat of the military force, like I just said, to conduct aggressive foreign policy. So essentially, he's going to get whatever he wants because he has this U.S. Navy. He has this big stick, as you see here. All right, so I mentioned this before, but the Great White Fleet, that is going to be the U.S. Navy. So the Great White Fleet is a fleet of American ships, or just a huge group of American ships that go around the globe to show off military power. So this is kind of like a military parade, almost. So he took this route here, goes around a little bit, and is showing off to the world how strong his ships are, and saying kind of like, oh, look at how big my ships are. You better not attack me, or you don't know what's going to happen. We might use our Great White Fleet, our big ships, to hurt you. This leads to further involvement in South and Central America, so South America, Central America, with the Roosevelt Corollary. We will learn about the Roosevelt Corollary in that next slide here. So the Roosevelt Corollary is an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. We talked about the Monroe Doctrine yesterday. The Monroe Doctrine is the idea that Europe should stay in Europe and America should stay in America. And we should not get involved with each other's problems. However, Roosevelt added a stipulation. If countries engaged in activities that were harmful to the United States, or if their governments collapsed, then the U.S. would serve as an international policing power. So, what this means is that any U.S. interests, if Roosevelt or the president or the United States in general feel like there is something going on that would harm them or their interests, when it's saying interests, it just means economic interests. Is there Americans living there that might be threatened? There's a lot of different reasons why you can get involved with the Roosevelt Corollary. So, again, that Monroe Doctrine is saying stay out, Europe and Europe, America and America, no one should get involved. But the Roosevelt Corollary is kind of giving the United States permission to be an international policing power. In other words, the U.S. would intervene to prevent interventions, specifically European powers. So if Europe does get involved with something that the United States feels they shouldn't, the United States is allowed to intervene and kind of attack if they feel it is necessary. So, Roosevelt Corollary also expand presidential power. This is really what Teddy Roosevelt's all about. He's all about expanding presidential power, kind of pushing the limits of what the president is able to do. We saw that in the last unit with the foundation of the FDA and the mine strikes. We continually see Roosevelt pushing the boundaries of the presidential power, and he does that again with the Roosevelt Corollary. So Teddy Roosevelt, TR just means Teddy Roosevelt, mediated a peace agreement to the Russo-Japanese War. So this is a conflict between Japan and Russia in 1905, and this actually grants him a Nobel Peace Prize. So Russia and Japan are fighting. Teddy Roosevelt steps in and negotiates with them as a mediator. Roosevelt's goal of intervening in conflicts in the Pacific was to ensure trade with China. Again, we had that open door policy, keeping trade open with China because of all those consumers that are in China. If we remember, China has lots of people that can buy those shovels that we were talking about. If I have shovels, I need someone to buy those. So Roosevelt wants to keep Chinese customers buying American goods. Okay, so here we have Taft, and you guys know how I feel about Taft, but this picture is really funny because he's whipping it really hard. So Taft was elected in 1908. He's not as aggressive as Teddy Roosevelt. We learned that really the only thing he did was bust up some trusts, and then he sold land and made conservationists mad, and he increased tariffs. So overall, Taft is not great. So main policy goals. His main policy goals are to keep an open door with Asia, so continuing trade with Asia, preserving stability in Latin America, and then again we have this idea of dollar diplomacy. So Roosevelt's idea is the big stick diplomacy, so have a big stick and scare people, and Taft's idea is that if you invest in other countries, then they will have respect for you, and America will have good investments, and their investments will return. So Taft wanted to maintain orderly societies abroad through increased American investments in foreign economies. So he's just investing in other countries. So dollar money. So substituting dollars for bullets. That's a phrase when he's thinking about imperialism, when he's thinking about McKinley, how they had the Spanish-American War, how there was the revolt in Panama. He's saying, okay, instead of having wars and fighting, we should just give money and invest in these other countries, in get something out of it that way instead of attacking. So you can see here that he is putting up the big stick. He does not, he's not using that. So he did not work as well as Taft wanted, this dollar diplomacy. His investments in China were threatened by the Japanese and Russian. There was an attack on a railroad, and he feared that this might close that open door. So Taft's dollar diplomacy. Underneath you have Teddy's big stick. You say, go invest in Latin America with the full faith in the U.S. government and its military. So he kind of turns and says, okay, we're going to invest in these countries, but if it doesn't work in the end, we might have to use Teddy's big stick, which is the U.S. Navy, to intimidate people. Because, like I said, this dollar diplomacy does not work out that well. And lastly, we have Wilson. So Wilson's moral diplomacy. So Wilson believed in democracy over everything. And if we look at McKinley and Roosevelt's history, they do not so much believe that as much as Wilson does. So Wilson wants democracy over everything. He favored countries who had a democratic government already in place and led the U.S. intervention in the Mexican Revolution, sending U.S. troops to Mexico to put down the rebel leader Pancho Villa. A number of Americans and Mexicans were killed in this prolonged conflict. So he wants to teach people about democracy and increase democracy in other countries. So this is the idea of moral diplomacy. Again, not very successful, but it increased it didn't increase. I don't know why I said that. It soured relations between the two countries for years to come. So the problem was that Wilson was getting involved with this, and people were not really happy about it. So this really did not work out, trying to get democracy there. Okay, that is the last slide. This is also posted on Google Classroom for you. You can pause and go back if you would like at any time. Thank you.